Now to talk about this year in politics, Rosie Gray, reporter for BuzzFeed News, and Ryan Grimm, reporter for Huffington Post. All right, I've been thinking about this what the kind of big takeaway trend, the kind of top line thing that happened that was new and most important in politics this year. Rosie Gray, what would you nominate?
Well, I think the obvious answer is the Trump phenomenon. He's just completely turned the primary on its head and really the Republican Party on its head. And it's led to so many ripple effects throughout the party and throughout sort of our political atmosphere right now. I think that's kind of the obvious answer.
You had a really good piece about what calls itself the alt-right, which is a kind of internet movement of white nationalists. They don't like to call themselves white supremacists, although if you spend any time reading with them, they pretty clearly think white people are superior. Tell me about what the alt-right is and how they kind of relate to the Trump phenomenon.
Well, it's sort of a movement that grew out of, that sees itself as really a rejection of mainstream conservatism. But they're basically white nationalists who really understand the internet. It's not your father's white nationalists, if you know what I mean. I mean, these are people who have like a really good grasp of sort of the current politics of the internet in 2015. And they're becoming sort of a little bit more and more mainstream because they're all really big Trump supporters and they see him as validating certain aspects of their ideology.
Yeah, it's amazing how it only takes you a few clicks when interact. It's a remarkable thing that has been very clear to me since the sort of rise of this phenomenon. You're always a click or two away when sort of interacting with a Trump supporter from it gets like real white supremacist real fast when you start to enter into the online world of Donald Trump support. Ryan, what do you think the sort of top or a top political trend of the year is?
You know, one thing that really struck me was at the last Democratic debate, the candidates actually spent a significant amount of time talking about the heroin crisis in this country, and it's so unusual for an issue like that doesn't really have a partisan edge to bubble up, into the national political conversation. And the candidates, by traveling through rural places like Iowa and New Hampshire, other than Trump, who doesn't actually campaign in a real way, have just met so many people whose lives have been destroyed by this that they have just begun talking about it because they've realized that so many voters actually care about it.
I think it's so fascinating. I think this is the one place where the kind of campaign system is actually working, right? I mean, the idea is that you go out, you talk to people, and you hear what's going on, and you sort of respond to them. And heroin is an issue, and addiction, and treatment for that addiction, way that we should think about drugs and the war on drugs. It really does seem organic. And it also, Ryan, seems like the rhetoric is so notably different than, say, the rhetoric on crack in the late 1980s, early 1990s.
Yeah, I think that's right, and it goes early in the spring. Hillary Clinton, some of her aides told us that she was hearing a lot about this, and you hear from one person whose child died of an overdose. That's one thing. You hear every event you go to, when you start getting confronted with this, then you really start to think of it. And the conversation at the debate was kind of striking in the sense of how nuanced it was and how martial, non-warlike it was. And part of that is you had Martin O'Malley, who, as mayor of Baltimore, dealt with this in a real granular way. But they were talking about, hey, we need to go to emergency rooms, and that's where you need to make your first intervention with people who are struggling with this. And this was nothing like the fear mongering that the drug war has been over the last 30 years.
So my top trend, which relates in some ways to what Rosie is talking about, is I think the most interesting thing that's happened this year are these sort of two things running up against each other. One is that partisan polarization in terms of identification is more intense than it's ever been in America. This polling, which is pulled out by Vox, is fascinating. Would you be upset if your child married someone from the other political party? 1965 and 4% Democrats and Republicans respectively. It goes up 27 and 20%. By 2010, which is again 5 years ago, 49% of Republicans, 33% of Democrats. So people see this identity as increasingly central at the same time that the thing that they're identifying with the Republican or Democratic Party is institutionally collapsing. The Republican Party seems to be, as an entity, to have no actual substance or center. It can't tell anyone what to do. All the money in politics is sort of altered it. So you have this bizarre situation this year in which everyone's more partisan in some senses, more polarized, more associated with these entities, at the same time those entities are losing actual institutional power. That, to me, I think is going to be one of the biggest stories we see coming up in 2016. Rosie Gray, Ryan Grimm, a Happy New Year to both of you. Thank you for joining us.